Welcome to the first episode of Our Soft Machine, the mental health podcast where we hope to raise awareness simply and just by talking about it. Because frankly, is it really talked about enough? I don't think so. So, my name is Andrew.
My name is Sebastian.
And we hope to just educate people about, what's been going on in not just our lives, but also in the States, in the world, and really hope to let people know that you're not alone. Mental health is something that's way more common than people realize, but it just is talked about in such a way where we're not encouraged always to speak our minds, or we're worried about, what's going to come out. What is it? It's going to be different for everybody. Mental health is indiscriminate. It has no preference of race, gender, credence, whatever. And so we all face it in a different way. It's very subjective. Definitely you and I have different experiences with mental health at different points of our lives. And I think a lot of people don't realize that it can really strike at any time.
Right.
So we are hoping to change that just a little bit. We're not educators. We are not professionals. We have a basic understanding from personal experience, but also from everything that we've read online, everything that we've learned in our, academic career. All that is going to come into a definition that is all in its own. It's unique. Does it resonate with you? Maybe. I don't know. If it does, it does. If it doesn't, that's actually right. There's no right definition of these things. So we hope to, at the very least, engage people and let people know, we're out here. Someone is out there. You're not alone, especially in the climate that we're in right now. I think every generation may have their own specific climate, but none quite like this, where we can have a voice through countless apps, through personas, through countless medias or mediums. I don't know. Was it medias or mediums?
I think it's mediums.
Okay. So either or, everyone has a voice. Whether it's through the internet, through a therapist, through a friend, that voice needs to be heard. If you're feeling upset, if you're feeling annoyed, if you're feeling uncomfortable, is it mental health concerns, or is it just maybe a moment? Hard to say, really. But as long as we are aware of it and we practice that self-awareness, that hope, I think, and also that education, we can strive and move forward into whatever recovery looks to us. So that's a very broad statement, but I think it's okay. I think it'll be a good way to just kind of let people know what we're going to try to tackle with this podcast.
Yeah, and as far as being concerned about being too broad, I was expecting that. When you approached me about a mental health podcast, it's kind of like saying, and I'll get into this later, but it's kind of like saying I want to start a physical health podcast with you, Sebastian. It's going to probably, I know, be on the focus of psychology, but I think it's going to also delve into other territories, partly to do with physical health, like biology.
Yeah, we can't help that.
Sociology.
Yeah. I think the idea for a very long time is that it was a medical model. Essentially, you have sadness, you're depressed, and it's a straight line. Unfortunately, over the past years, that's still kind of held up, but there's also been a shift into a recovery model, which means that we're trying to focus more on the individual and less on the diagnosis. And that's kind of also where the broad spectrum comes in. I don't really know if we can define it. I think what we're going to end up doing is just going to give people tidbits here and there, maybe. And then we're going to just run with that.
You mean define mental health?
Today and moving forward.
Right.
So.
It'll be hard, but
like I've said, there's no right definition.
And that's definitely what I tried to avoid convincing myself of.
Mm-hmm.
So I sat down and asked myself what mental health means to me. before I even started looking anything up. And basically, I have this idea that mental health is essentially a parallel to physical health.
Okay.
For some examples, how do you process emotions? Sort of like a metabolism, like how do you process certain nutrients and foods, and parts of that can be dysfunctional. And so you have to take a vitamin supplement, for example.
Yeah, okay.
What is your reaction to certain situations? Do you have a severe reaction, something that's out of the range of normal, if I can use that word? I don't know if you want me to avoid it, but
I mean, it's so subjective.
Right.
It means whatever you want it to mean, almost.
so do these things fall into a normal range? As an example of that parallel, getting higher blood pressure during pregnancy is normal. Getting really high blood pressure during pregnancy is not. And I would compare that to something like, say, a length of time in mourning.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone has their own length of time that they need, but there is a certain point where someone can observe it and say, this is detrimental to you, your health, your overall well-being.
Yeah.
And as far as that goes, it's I also had an idea of influences on that. Personal experiences, biases, genetic disposition, and also in outer influences, physical environment, relationships, and cultural beliefs and societal values.
It's funny, you've touched on a lot of things that I think we're going to eventually talk about, but you did say one specific thing that I think caught my attention the most was personal experience. Because you and I are both people who have been treated and have sought our own wellness, our own well-being, our own definition of mental health. I am not embarrassed by it. I am not ashamed to admit, or I'm very open. I'm an open book about my depression, my anxiety, my struggles with relationships, family, social dynamics, alcoholism, which is perpetuated by just the anxiety. Actually, so what happens is that you find a lot of these things almost being cyclical. But I've learned a lot because I've also sought a lot of treatment. I have gone through years of therapy. I've gone through medications that I can't remember the names of now. I can't remember how many side effects, the withdrawals. I don't really know always what's working, but I know I don't want to give up. I know I don't want to stop. I know this isn't my normal. So I've always persevered into finding the next thing that's going to help. And a lot of things is, it's almost self-taught, actually. Podcasting, for example, is a really good one because it's helped me move forward with my voice. It's helped me move forward with my confidence. And it's actually taken a lot of the virtual world out into the real world, where I'm able to apply a lot of things. And this is my own small coping mechanism. And coping is difficult because it's going to be very subjective. So this is what we're going to find a lot of, honestly. We're going to find that sometimes the simplest answer is more often than not, and uncomfortably, the right one. But it's not as simple as it seems. It's always easier said than done. So
I really like the phrase that you introduced, this is not my normal, which is a good way of thinking about it. It's kind of the only normal that we know. And using ourselves as a baseline can sometimes be helpful, sometimes not.
Mm.
But when we observe others, I think part of recovery can start coming from introspection and self-awareness.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
Yeah, I know this is not my normal is kind of a great idea.
And to touch on that a little bit, and I hope I'm not being too revealing, but I know you're new to podcasting, you're new to speaking your voice in this format. I'm not so much. So I'm very happy that you're doing this because it's not your normal, but that doesn't mean it won't be. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
So you're accepting something that is a challenge and that is making you uncomfortable. And sometimes a lot of mental health is that, where we may know that something X, Y, and Z is making us uncomfortable and something is keeping us back from embracing it or challenging it or whatever it is. And I think a lot of therapy, a lot of treatment is facing the uncomfortable.
Speaking of which, making myself uncomfortable. you you revealed your diagnoses. I know you said I was free to keep it as open and private as I want, and I think it does help a lot to know that there are others out there. So I'm a big fan of being open about it.
Yeah.
Whether it be coworkers, acquaintances. When I say acquaintances, I mean even people I just met. You know, if I have a good read on them, that if it works, I'm not saying I don't insert my depression into every conversation. You know, hey, how you doing today? Clinically depressed. Okay. No,
But I'm good otherwise.
So, yeah, you know, it's fine. Like, this is just a thing I deal with every day. So it's, you know, no, it's for me, it's been depression primarily, and if you'd asked me, I don't even know how long ago, if you'd asked me before if I thought I'd be in years of therapy, I did not realize it would be quite this big of a journey.
So intensive.
So intensive, and so for me it was depression, emotional issues, particularly with anger. That was a really big one for me. Struggles with alcohol, and relationship issues as well. Even going so far as to have my partner join me in some sessions, which has greatly helped things.
And I definitely can actually, again, it's all subjective. Some people really do like and benefit from that. Others kind of want to go a more solo route. And I actually really thank you for saying those things, because I know it's not always easy, but it does get easier as you talk about it. And again, this is all about trying to raise awareness, trying to let people know that you're not alone, and that wherever you are, you don't have to be, which is basically the idea that I really love. There's a huge question in mental health treatment and psychology that, and media and stereotypes of what's wrong with you. And a lot of people don't ask what's happened.
Actually, that's a really good point. Speaking on the last point of including my partner in my sessions, when people think of couples counseling, I think they automatically think of a failing relationship, the marriage on the verge of divorce. And don't get me wrong, I've brought my partner in before to discuss issues between us. But the very first time that I brought my partner in, it was actually not to solve a problem, quote unquote. I was utilizing my counseling session as a tool. We were considering moving in together, and we just assumed that there should be some questions we should be asking ourselves, and we were just too excited to acknowledge. So my therapist kind of helped us navigate that idea and exactly what we should be concerned about, whether it be living space, finances, whose name is in what. So it was, like you just said, nothing was wrong. It was just a tool that I realized I could utilize for this very important life event.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it, a tool. A lot of people see it as a chronic illness, and that's treatment for a problem. I mean, a lot of things that you've said are actually extremely common. I have a coworker who just moved in with her husband for the first time. Like, they were engaged and everything and lived separately. And the first conversation I had with her when she came back was, how are things living together? And she said, like, I wanted to lose my shit. She had never had that experience. So this is someone who's at a, I don't want to say normal, but like a conventional level, you know? So these are all problems that we face to some degree conventionally, but not normally. And some of us take it to a higher degree than others. So, you know, you had mentioned diabetes in the medical model in a way. You know, some people have pre-diabetes. So you're on the verge of something, and where do you handle that? Some preventative care. You handle diabetes the same way. It's manageable, but it's not conventional, but it's normal for you. So where do you find, you know, a happy medium? You know, there's a big buzzword in mental health that's wellness, and it's so broad. That's probably the biggest thing. And you know, the more you share these things, the more you realize that other people feel them too, just at different degrees. The fact that you did a type of couples counseling with someone you're not married to, I think is very progressive. Because usually a lot of people use that or think of that as a last resort to saving a marriage, like you said. A lot of people don't think of it as a tool to continue what's already good there.
Right.
That's actually really forward thinking, I think. And I'm glad you said tool, because that's something that people don't think about when they think about even like their medical problems.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, so that was my definition of mental health earlier, and if you don't mind, I had looked up some.
Oh, I mind. No, I don't.
Okay. Oh, thank you.
Continue.
Again, this is my first podcast, so I wasn't aware of the rules.
Yes, you have the podcast talking stick. Continue.
What is an objective definition of mental health? Now, obviously most of these are fairly long, probably too long to mention. And I will say that actually two of them, I looked it up at mentalhealth.gov and cdc.gov.
Okay.
And they actually, those two actually share the same paragraph.
Really?
Verbatim, yes. So I don't know who stole what from what, but just so you guys both know, one of you government agencies...
we're on to you.
Yeah. I do like, actually, though, what they tend to add on. I will say, in this definition, though, you are correct. The idea of, they don't say wellness, but well-being comes up multiple times. Now, in the mentalhealth.gov definition, they end it with, people with mental health problems can get better and many recover completely, which I really liked as an ending sentence, because it doesn't just stop it at defining mental health as a problem and a list of symptoms. They end it with telling you can get better and you can recover.
So it helps establish some hope for not just recovery, but just, holistically.
Yes.
Yeah.
With cdc.gov, I really like their second paragraph. Although the terms are often used interchangeably, poor mental health and mental illness are not the same things. A person can experience poor mental health and not be diagnosed with a mental illness. And to paraphrase, vice versa.
I have actually, one of my favorite phrases is, it's a normal reaction to an abnormal situation. And that's exactly what happens with people who are not diagnosed with a mental health issue, concern, diagnosis, what have you. I think one of the most common things happens with grieving. A lot of people grieve differently.
Right.
But it's a very normal reaction to an abnormal situation. You don't expect to grieve.
There is probably very little preventative care for grieving.
Yeah, I don't know what to tell you other than like people die.
Yeah.
That's not very consoling.
Actually, you know what? There is preventative care to that.
Ice cream?
No, I said preventative. Preventative care would be to isolate yourself from your family and don't make any friends. Don't experience loss. Don't experience grieving.
All right.
Checkmate.
So solitude. Live in the woods.
Yes. But don't get too attached to any trees.
Oh, yeah. Birds. Flies have a very short lifespan.
So much grief.
Although that could also alternatively be a good way to build up a tolerance for grieving.
So many tiny tombstones.
So, yes, you're right. All these definitions are going to involve different things. And, of the three that I found, actually, from the World Health Organization, doesn't work when you say it as an acronym, mentalhealth.org, as well as the APA, which is the American Psychiatric Association. They use one buzzword, well-being.
Well-being.
Yeah. And they each have their own stats. They each have their own definition. But the one that you just said, though, actually focuses really well on the positive side of it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a definition actually that is really important, I think, by the World Health Organization that makes a point to stress the positive dimension. They will say that's not only in line with the mental health side they're trying to address, but with the medical, physical, social well-being of a person. I mean, they use well-being twice in their definition. That's kind of redundant, but it's very relevant.
On the World Health Organization, mental health obviously requires specialization in its own field, but I do like it very much to be viewed in conjunction with your health as a whole. And their top principle, which I really enjoyed, was, quote, "Health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity." And that's exactly how I like to view mental health, is in the scope of in the scope of mental health, but also in the scope of physical health and, as they say, social well-being. For where you are geographically, culturally, being comfortable there.
Yeah, and it's not always easy. And, we can talk about that all day, but that's kind of also the point of this ongoing podcast. So we can just continue talking about it. And what is probably the biggest barrier to all of those things is stigma. I personally think so.
Yes. Absolutely.
I like we said earlier, we're trying to raise awareness with this podcast.
Actually, there is no stigma. So, I guess podcast over. It was a good ride.
Well, it lasted of all 30 minutes. Thank you and good night.
We solved it, guys.
That's it.
I mean, we are here talking about it, so
we did our job. Go do yours.
Stigma gone. Go out there, talk to people.
Yeah,
it's good.
Go up to a stranger. Hey, I'm depressed. What about you?
And they'll roll their eyes and say, "It's so mainstream."
I mean, that kind of so mainstream. That's with media, we're given such a voice that it feels almost mainstream. Yeah. And unfortunately, because it's as such, it gets invalidated.
Yeah, it can almost hurt that quest for destigmatization.
Exactly. I mean, think about the way it's talked about. Language is huge in mental health. We have triggers, we have misconceptions, we have misnomers, we have underrepresentation, we have basically a lot of misses and a lot of unders. And that's not including the colloquials. Bipolar is a colloquial.
Right.
Yes. The first time I heard someone say that, I wasn't even aware that I was upset by it until I continuously heard that person say, so-and-so is bipolar. It's a very specific disease, well, rather illness or condition. And when you trivialize it by just throwing it around like that, it loses a meaning, or it changes a meaning, rather. Language is so important, and when we talk about it, it creates a stigma, it perpetuates it, unfortunately.
Yeah, my partner had that same experience with ADD, and that is often used as, "Oh, I'm so ADD."
Yeah,
to describe forgetfulness, and other such quirks.
That's a good one, actually. Yeah, you'll see a lot of people misuse that. Yeah,
and actually, even in the health field, when it became a diagnosable condition, it was
still very questionable.
Yeah, it was misused to label what we eventually started to realize was normal childhood behavior in some instances.
And some people were even like, let's beat our kid or something. Let's go back to that. Or we're not intense enough with our children. We're letting them do too much. I have worked at a daycare and I have heard these arguments, and they were just so strange to me. And then you have the other end of the spectrum where you're saying, or you're introducing adult onset attention deficit disorder. And I mean, I'm not well versed in that, but I don't doubt that could be a condition. It's just, It's almost like chronic fatigue syndrome. You know?
Yeah, yeah.
It's like, where is that line? How thin is it? How blurry is it? It's hard to tell, but it's legitimate and it's there. We just kind of have to probe a little bit.
Right.
And we have to keep an open mind.
Absolutely. And I think people concern themselves so much with lines. Creating this situation that doesn't exist, as a quick example, gender identity. I actually was just at a...
which is pretty topical.
It is. I was actually just at a dinner at a friend's house where...
Not mine. Not my dinner.
And long story short, there was a discussion of somebody who identified as something other than their born-given gender, I guess.
If you identify with the gender you were born with, I think you are cisgender.
Yes. And one of the guys immediately says, I identify as a attack helicopter.
Oh.
And it's like, no one has ever taken it that far. When someone says, where does it end? Where do we draw the line? My simple answer is somewhere. Probably an attack helicopter. We'll know it when we get there, I suppose. But no one's taken it there yet.
Well, you know what's funny about that statement, though? That was said by a journalist.
Oh.
Yeah, actually, that was first said by I think either a news anchor or a journalist in Canada, I believe. And she said that an exact response to that same conversation, but taken at a more intense level, where people were protesting and advocating for this change. And her rebuttal was just that. I identify as a attack helicopter. And so it sparked a whole, internet outrage.
Right.
And she has gotten a lot of shit since then. But she kind of makes a point. It's not the most popular point, and it's not probably the most well thought out point. But I understand where she's coming from, and I understand both sides. And that's sometimes not always the most welcome approach. That line is, sometimes you want that line to be drawn at your convenience. And when you are met with a opposing view, that line becomes clearer for the sake of your argument. And it's harder to have these open discussions at that point.
That's a very good point. I think it's important to recognize our biases, especially coming from a show where the whole point is speaking from personal experiences, anecdotal evidence, and our own unique understanding of the subject. Probably I will piss off someone out there.
You're going to piss someone off. I'm going to piss someone off. We're going to piss you off.
Particularly, not to harp on it, but I do... Actually, you know what? I preemptively apologize to the attack helicopter community.
I'm glad you did that. We don't want to offend that community especially. But the rebuttal sounds violent.
In all seriousness, I'm not insensitive. So I'm open to criticism. I'm open to changing some of how I view things, say things.
Not all helicopters are attack helicopters.
But hopefully it can be appreciated that I have a sense of humor. Andrew does as well. And so hopefully...
I'd like to think so, and I think you need that.
You can understand that sometimes that's where some of this comes from.
Oh, no, I am the first person to say that humor in this field needs to be almost self-deprecating, but also offending. Because I think when you offend someone or you challenge someone's beliefs, it's only good for an open rhetoric. Which I mean, like, it will help anyone to either reinforce or influence that belief. There's an article I read not too long ago. No, it wasn't an article, actually. It was a podcast. I think it was...
You read the podcast?
I read transcripts.
Okay.
Whatever. Don't
actually, I have too. I do. I've actually printed out...
I have written transcripts.
Yeah.
So, leave me alone. No, but there was a podcast. I think it was Vox Explained or a TED Talk. No, it was a TED Talk. And it was just that exact same thing. Where one student body tried to challenge, or one student in a student body tried to challenge the idea of what people thought, and they were offended because of how radical their idea was. But if you think about it, coming from that person's perspective, that group's also a radical idea. It's just two ends meeting, and neither is happy with the other. So you either reinforce your idea by hearing the other side and saying, oh yeah, this is wrong, or this is whatever, or you try to understand the argument to get a whole picture. So we're open, I think. Well, it's funny. I think everyone who says they're open likes to think they're open. But we do definitely hope to expand our own view, and unfortunately that may involve some offensivity, offension, what have you. It's going to be challenging. But I am definitely a big advocate of discomfort being a catalyst for change.
I'm very uncomfortable. This is
good.
This is a change for me. Those two seem to be coinciding right now, so
very good.
I agree with that assessment.
Thank you very much. It's my professional assessment as a person with lived experience. Isn't that validating?
It is absolutely, actually. It's, on the one hand, it's really nice actually to have this little chunk of the world where we're putting our voices out there, where I'm putting my voice out there. And sometimes what I see with what I see happen with big creators, some small part of me, of course, likes the idea of thinking that this will ever be popular, but is concerned with that as well. It's
natural.
Right.
It's very natural.
And I think it's harder. I think it's easier to be frank with an audience that is drawn to you. But if you ever are finding yourself in the fray of an audience that has discovered you for some reason, then it starts to get a little bit more difficult to not offend someone.
Yeah, because you're kind of already quasi-established in a way.
Yeah.
But I think you're doing a really good job actually at taking this as a challenge, and I think you're in a way coping with it really well. And that kind of also, in my mind, that begs the question: do we learn them on our own, or are we taught? I don't think I have an answer for that, because I think it's a little bit of column A, a little column B.
Right, and I always appreciate you pushing me into stuff like this.
I will push you into traffic.
All right. This is a little love session that Andrew and I do whenever we get together.
Push people into traffic.
Right.
Wait, no.
No?
No? Not yet. Okay.
I'm uncomfortable again.
That's okay. I think that's a very good segue into treatments a little bit.
Gosh.
What?
Yeah. Go ahead.
You've already mentioned couples therapy. I have mentioned my own experiences with medication in a way. I think you cannot include the definition of mental health without also including treatment. So the biggest thing when I went through my undergrad was learning the symptoms and what they can lead to. So what ended up happening though is that I had a conversation with a professor, and we found out that a lot of things are more symptomatic than they are actual syndromes. And so we kind of discussed what are we really treating? Are we treating syndromes? Or are we treating symptoms? I believe we're treating symptoms, because if you look at depression and anxiety, those are very underlying for, depression, anxiety, obviously, but bipolar, schizophrenia, you name it, you're going to fall into those categories. Any personality disorder is going to include probably the first 3 or 4 same symptoms. Unfortunately, I think mental health is in that regards like a 3-dimensional spectrum where you're dealing with so many things at once. It's not any one thing. Treatment is hard. It's very subjective, and it requires a lot of mutual effort, which is what I think people forget When you go to a doctor, you rely on the doctor's advice, on the doctor's opinion, on the doctor's education. And it's very one way. When you're going to therapy, though, if you don't like the person you're dealing with, managing, helping them help you, you're not going to progress.
Right.
It's very important that you vibe. And that's a new agey thing I like to think of. When you vibe with someone, it's very important.
That actually hits really close to home for me. Well, not that close to home. More like my next door neighbor. In any case, I've had people. I'm so good at this.
You're doing great. Go. Keep
I've
going.
had people. You lost me there for a second, and sometimes Andrew in his academia will outpace me a little bit, but now that he's touched on that with how important it is you get along with the person treating you.
Can I bring it back?
Thank you. He what that reminded me of is people that I've heard when they tell me I tried therapy and I didn't like it. And once I tried therapy myself, which took way too long, I started to realize I think these people meant I didn't like the therapist.
Yeah.
They would tell me, and one person even told me, almost boasted how combative she was with the person, or they didn't tell her anything that they didn't already know. And I would like at some point in the future to discuss almost what you should expect. And I think if people were prepared for that, it would help them. It would help them immensely.
And you're right. You're totally right. Because I one big part of my job is letting people know or helping people to expect those things. I think people don't realize that they're going to divulge probably more than they want to, or even be asked almost what seems like redundant questions or irrelevant questions. It's difficult to establish that one way or the two-way connection with 1, 2, 3 sessions. It's not easy, but I always encourage people to ask questions, because this is, again, someone you're going to work with for, who knows how long. And if you don't expect things from them, then I think it's not going to work as well, because they're also kind of expecting you to come to them with something to work with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I know save it for a future episode, but my first almost a year of therapy, I was so frustrated because basically I wasn't handed, here, I think you should do this. I wasn't handed solutions.
Right.
And at a certain point, I realized I really don't know much about this person, and that's kind of the point. And so I started to divulge much more personal things, which cascaded into this, I guess it would be called soundboarding.
Which is what I do with my therapist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I say things, and it's essentially me thinking out loud.
Yeah.
And
it's amazing what you can hear yourself say.
Yeah.
When you're saying it to someone else.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And he'll interject with questions. And that's the most I get out of him. Questions. Not answers. Questions.
I'm a very firm believer that we have the answers to our problems or questions or whatever have you. I think the thing that holds us back, though, is well, it's going to be personal. For me, it's definitely that anxiety, that fear of failure, that fear of what's on the other side. But my therapist does ask a lot of questions. She makes very good points, and I need to hear those sometimes. And I need to hear myself, again, bouncing off that soundboard. And you were saying that you took a year to come to where you're at. I think that the influence of media, I don't know if on you personally, but I think that may definitely affect the way that people come into treatment. We're expected to come into, I definitely am actually guilty of that. When I took my medication, when I went to therapy, I was expecting to be told what to do, and I'll be better, or I'll take the medication and I'll be better. It didn't work that way. at all. And I definitely didn't realize I had that much media influence or just this misunderstanding of what's going on the other side. It's not simple. It's not simple enough. Like, think about like when you meet a person for the first time, you know, you're asking a lot of questions. It's a two-way street. You can't expect them really to tell you their life story and to establish that connection before you really made the proper uncomfortable awkwardness, the weird conversation, you know. It's not too different, I think. The point is, make a connection with the person that you are talking to, whether it's your therapist or your psychiatrist, and they are very different. Yes. And you should definitely approach them mindfully.
Yes, I probably did I think a year and a half of therapy before I even saw a psychiatrist.
I went that same route.
Yeah. Actually, for some background, how old were you when you first started therapy, if you don't mind me asking?
I think I was 15, around that age. So I was like kind of lucky to have a family friend who was doing her, I don't even know what it was, to be honest with you, but she was studying LPC or something like that. LPC stands for licensed practicing clinician or counselor, I think. And so I think I was more like practice for her because it was like free, but it helped to vent. It helped to have someone there to speak to. And I think at the time I was probably the most angry. So at the time I assumed because I'm a teenager, I'm going to be angry. But I had a lot of weird ideas at the time. And after that, though, I kind of avoided therapy because I felt uncomfortable speaking my mind, because she tried to encourage me to go talk to like a group. And I was just like, I don't know, I'm kind of weirded out. And so I stopped.
As a teenager?
As a teenager, yeah. I started as a teenager.
No, I mean, telling a teenager go speak to a group about some of your most interpersonal thoughts and dealings with.
Dude, it was weird.
That is
I was
daunting.
just like, why would I... My first thought was like, why would I speak to a bunch of adults about my morality? Like, I don't... My first thought was actually... My second thought was like, what's wrong with their morality? But, I mean, I don't know. It's ever changing, and it's true. Like, I stopped after a while, and I kind of avoided it, and then I realized this is something I can't just leave alone.
Right.
And so when I got into college, I was fortunate enough to have services through that. And I saw a couple of therapists. I saw a couple of psychiatrists. I went through a couple of medications. And it really wasn't until even like a couple of years ago that I feel I got on the right one. This entire time, though, I met with, I don't know what you would call it, but I was met with antagonism, maybe, or whatever you have it, negativity from my parents, from myself. And so it was difficult to really go through that, even through some of the people I knew, actually. You know, the thing about mental health is sometimes what you see on the outside, it does not and will not reflect what you feel on the inside.
Right. That touches on what the CDC definition of mental health, where they mention that poor mental health does not mean mental illness. And I often think that that's also misconstrued with seeking treatment for mental health. Mm-hmm. is also often seen as that something is weak or broken in you, when sometimes it's just trying to continue something, which we talked about earlier. But
I tell people, like, hey, you know, when you talk to someone about, you know, like stress, or you vent to someone about whatever and you feel better, just take that to another level.
Pay for it.
What was Dilbert's?
That's mental health.
What was Scott Adams' joke in Dilbert? You know, free therapy is overpriced.
Yeah.
So, you know, this entire time, though, we're kind of touching, like tiptoeing around the fact of education. Like I said, undergrad, I went in there not knowing these things were available. I think when we go into treatment, we're not educated what to expect. Either therapy or medication. Sometimes, you know, sometimes the side effects for some medications are like, may give you suicidal thoughts. Like, wait a second, I'm trying to avoid that. Like, You know?
But, right, it's an understanding of what that statement means
Yeah.
and why that would be brought about. Like you said, educating people.
Exactly. So I kind of want to touch on something that I think has probably been a long time in the making for sure, and I think you have more idea about it than I do. But I did recently read an article from HuffPost. I mean, granted, now it's about 2 months old, but no less relevant and long overdue still, was that New York and Virginia became the first states to mandate mental health education. I think that is ridiculously overdue, not just because of the climate over the last decade, but we're not taught to handle a lot of situations in our life as we get older. The subjective ones, we're met with objective problems that we're supposed to rely on, how to do math or how to comprehend words, how to expect point A leading to point B, and that's not always the case when you're older, because there's so many other variables in there that you just don't, either you don't foresee them or you don't want them there.
Yeah, actually, that idea actually reminds me a lot of this Jens Lekman interview that I read. It's this Swedish singer-songwriter.
Who's amazing.
He is.
Nice guy, dude.
Yeah.
Well, we went to a concert for him.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah, and I
haven't been to one since, but yeah.
I got into a very uncomfortable conversation with him that it pissed someone else off in the line.
Yeah. He's a very humble guy. Actually, yeah, the second show I went to, he did the exact same thing. Everyone got in a line and he talked to them. He talked to people. Actually, it's really funny because that I'm even mentioning him because now I'm remembering a part of that interview where he said that what he first wanted to do was be a social worker like his dad.
Oh.
And that's why he is the way he is with his fans. They can email him, and post concerts they can talk to him, and he just listens because he thinks that's what people need and that's what they want from their role models.
Human connection.
Right. And on the topic of role models, he approached his last album from that idea of tackling things as he was approaching 30, because his idea on 30 was, we have a lot of role models growing up. We have role models on TV and in music who are when we're teenagers, and they explore kind of the things that we're going to be feeling throughout those years. When we enter our 20s, there's, Friends, How I Met Your Mother, not that they're necessarily a discussion on life in your 20s in an accurate representation, but these are mainstream, and that's how old characters tend to be. And he said he realized turning 30 is kind of scary, and part of the big problem is there's not a whole lot of role models for 30-year-olds. It feels like this sort of absent place in media.
Yeah, it's true. I never thought about that. Yeah, it's a good point.
Yeah, so that's why you just reminded me of that with the it is an ongoing thing. It is something we carry with us throughout our life. Mm-hmm. Just like our physical health again. So you just reminded me of that. Sorry about the tangent.
No, I started. Go. We were talking about the New York, Virginia.
Laws, yeah, New York and Virginia. Yes, obviously long overdue, and I do know a little bit
about it than I do.
Yeah, apparently.
You've done your research.
Yeah, a little bit too much.
So bring out the data. The data.
Okay.
The stats.
So yes,
put on your news anchor voice.
So you're right. This is July 22nd, 2018. New York, Virginia become first states to mandate mental health education. So the New York law, actually, so just to get into the specifics for a second, directs all K through 12 to instruct on mental health as part of the overall health curriculum.
Which is New York.
Yes, which I love already. I've expressed that several times. I like mental health to be viewed as overall health curriculum. What was somewhat concerning to me, but I sort of also completely understand. It doesn't specify the curriculum. It does clarify that it should be part of the overall health curriculum, but it doesn't specify anything. So, getting into something a little bit more personal, sidestep here. The reason that's concerning to me is considering my own experience in the Texas health education classes. Our experience, yes. But and we'll get back to that in a second. But in relation to that, it's that it could be dictated by community or educators' belief on the material. And given my partner's experience, those people, educators, professionals, admins.
Me?
No, I'll say co-host for you.
Okay.
But partner is definitely the person that I go home to.
Okay.
Which is not a cat.
Not gonna say I'm not offended, but okay.
Okay. Well, anyway, but educators and health professionals are not always advocates for mental health. I know that's surprising to hear. Maybe not for some of you, but it's definitely an issue. But I also understand it because if the curriculum was mandated or set by a set of rules, it probably would have been contentious. And also, to be fair, this is statewide. So
yeah,
different counties, different areas, different socioeconomic areas, they have different issues, different stressors.
Which makes that part of the lack of a curriculum very important. Yeah.
So at the end of the day, I completely understand it.
Kind of think of a stand and deliver situation. Almost. Where you have to meet them where they're at.
Yeah. So.
But the real draw to this was not only that they finally instated this, was really that, who brought it to them?
Actually, that's the Virginia law.
Mm-hmm.
For the New York law, it was actually one of the organizations you mentioned earlier, Mental Health America, I think.
America, yeah.
Yeah. And they had a 9-core curriculum. And essentially, I'm not going to read the whole thing out loud, but it's very ambitious.
And by the way, we have all these links in our description, so definitely look them up if you want.
Yeah. It's very ambitious. Just as an example, I mean, their core concepts, wellness and self-care. Hey, there's some of your buzzwords there.
There you go.
Integral part of health, recognition of signs and symptoms, relationship to substance use, which I will get on in a second when we get into the nitty-gritty. But what I really liked from that sheet, and it's a one-sheet document, you can read their core concepts that
it's only 9
that they presented to the New York State, was that the curriculum avoids diagnosis, treatment, or counseling as a learning objective.
Which kind of goes back to what I said, treating symptoms versus syndrome.
Yeah. So that was a concern of mine. I had a really good professor when I took Psych 101, and I got really into it because of him. But something that I think didn't really happen in his class, which I think is a big joke, was everyone diagnosing somebody with something. And I think it was because of the way he approached it and what he specifically avoided concentrating on as a subject. So it's not like, when I say avoid diagnosis, I don't mean, avoid the diagnosis of depression.
No, by no means. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it means avoid diagnosing someone.
Yeah.
With these things that we're learning about. But yeah, the recommendations they're ambitious, they're specific, and the law is vague yet narrow. But again, we'll get to that in a second. Now, what I'd like to take you to.
Take me on this trip.
No problem. Is
New York.
One of my concerns, which is our experience in the Texas education system in our health class.
Where to start? Let's start with our health class. So
I was taught by a gym teacher.
Me too.
Okay.
For one semester?
Yep. Just getting that out there. No dig on gym teachers. Obviously,
no, not at
you have to
all.
know
Actually, it's
about
more of a
health.
dig on the education system because
Yeah,
it's
it
not
really
uncommon
is.
for a gym teacher to teach things that they don't want to or need to teach. That was my experience, exactly. I had no idea that these things... Okay, so my impression of mental health was what I saw from the people around me and what I read on the internet. And at the time, when you're that age, you read blogs, you read Zanga, you read My Journal,
Wow.
and you can only presume so much.
Right.
But these were gym teachers who were like in their 60s, their 50s, their 70s, or whatever, and their concern wasn't to teach you like, hey, wear a condom. It was more like, is my team gonna win?
Yeah, and actually, just specifically on the concept of the condom, my partner did not even see a condom in person until nursing school.
That's a whole other conversation. That is a whole other conversation. But okay.
But that's Texas for you, honestly.
Actually, you're right. It is. It very much is. I think we are, Texas gets a lot of shit for being conservative, and it's true. And we're lucky, you and I, to be in Houston. Houston and Austin are probably the two outliers.
Yeah.
And I'm not surprised, actually.
Yeah, I mean, you can say it's a whole nother conversation, and maybe it is, but...
Well, it isn't. It isn't.
We have the highest, well, one of the highest, from my understanding, rates of teen pregnancy in the state, despite...
Woo!
Number one, well, 2 or 3. Despite our abstinence approach.
Studies show again and again absence does not work. But again, we are Texas. We are a conservative state. We are a religious state. We are also a let me do what the fuck I want to do state.
Yeah.
People think of us as Republican, but I would argue actually that we're more libertarian. But it is what it is. We are definitely let me do whatever the fuck I want to do.
I think we might have just lost some people there. I'd say
That's
independent,
fine.
but
I'm gonna challenge them.
That's fine. Yeah.
I will challenge you.
But
Actually, it's funny you say Texas education, but the reason I got into what I got into in college was because of my high school public psych teacher. He was so passionate about psychology as well, but also questioning the status.
Oh yeah, I wasn't bashing the education as a whole. It was specifically health, because that's what this curriculum is going to be tied into, is into health education as a whole. And so that means it could possibly be dictated by community or educators' belief on the material. Mm-hmm. And I mean, this is where we get into where do you draw that line? But I mean, I understand the freedom. I understand you have to let unique communities solve their unique issues for their students, stressors, things of that nature. But at the same time, just like not all educators or professionals are advocates for safe sex, but rather abstinence. Yeah. Not all educators and professionals are advocates for mental health. And just to bring that close to home, my partner going through nursing school, they were met with such resistance to their accommodations for ADD. And this is, by the way, a health and science school at this point. My partner's in nursing school. And one of the educators, the professors, actually told my partner, I think you should consider something other than nursing.
Wow.
Due to ADD. Despite the fact that in all of my partner's research, they had come upon this conclusion of becoming a nurse, because it was actually rated consistently as one of the top professions for people of ADD due to the constant sort of influx of information and action going on.
I imagine there's a compulsion there too.
Yeah, and a big thing about that was the lack of being given those accommodations. My partner had just come from another university before going to that health and science college, where they had gotten those accommodations no problem, very easily. But then they go to this other school system where they transferred, and suddenly my partner's fighting tooth and nail to get these accommodations, which is usually just a quiet room and 1 extra hour for testing. That's
not a lot to ask for.
No, it really wasn't. And she did not have a lot of advocates there. I guess I can stop saying my partner. But my partner did not have a lot of advocates there, which was incredibly surprising.
So she was in Texas the whole time, though, right?
She was in Texas the entire time.
Yeah, and it kind of speaks to volumes also regionally and culturally where you are.
Yeah.
So I imagine wherever she was when she started was a lot more accepting, and when she came into the second phase of that.
Oh, actually, I should probably mention that this was all in Houston.
Oh, God. All right. I mean, that totally negates what I said earlier, but all right.
Yeah, it was, this was all in Houston. So, you know what, this whole language thing I'm doing is really going to drive me nuts. Anyway, so she went to U of H. U of H was the very accommodating school. And then she went to UT Health Sciences.
Yeah, we are.
Yeah, and
UH, I mean.
Yeah, it was a very accommodating school for her. And then she went to UT Health Sciences, and it dumbfounded her that this place centered around health she was having to fight them on mental health.
Being at UT is actually really interesting because I know they've developed other programs that are more holistic. I've met a couple of med students that are doing what would seem new agey, actually, because they introduce meditation, they introduce mindfulness, they introduce basically introspection. So I wish that when she was there, those things were offered, but I don't know if they weren't or not, honestly. But
well, I'll tell you what wasn't offered: an hour extra in the silent room,
which is again not a lot to ask for.
That was the base accommodation she was requesting. But actually, I mean, that's exactly what we're talking about, though, making a change within a district or a community or organization. And if you don't mind, what you had talked about earlier of going back to the New York and Virginia laws, I would like to discuss how that Virginia law came about.
Yes, I'm actually, this is awesome, actually.
Yeah. So the Virginia law, which is a little bit, it's less reaching. It only requires, so as a reminder, the New York law was K through 12.
Yeah.
And it's integrated into the curriculum of health education. The Virginia law is the first 2 years of high school.
Yeah.
And it was started by a young man named Lucas Johnson and 2 other classmates. And basically what they did is they noticed in going through the stress that was their workload of, being AP students, doing track and field and extracurriculars, which, by the way, they recognize that the modern course load for a teenage student going through high school is extremely stress-inducing.
It can be.
It's a lot of workload, especially for someone as ambitious as these guys.
Yeah.
And so they don't deny that. What they're saying is it exists, it's there, but there's no way to deal with it.
Mm.
And so they basically spent time getting together a coffee shop, working together a plan to address their own schools. First, they didn't set out necessarily to change the state. They set out to address their schools and provide resources for their classmates. What they wanted to do was, their stated goals are actually around reducing stigma that surrounds seeking help. And I actually like their language of wanting to equip students with not just resources, but skills.
Yeah.
Like what you're talking about, meditation. Yeah, things of that nature. And they caught the attention of Senator R. Craig Deeds.
Yes.
Who was actually stabbed by his mentally ill son,
Yeah.
who then killed himself. So that was already on his plate. That was already in his focus.
Yeah.
And so he sponsored a bill.
Which, if you know, actually, also, that's not something that you just easily forget.
Yeah. He sponsored the bill, and again, it was 9th and 10th grade, and even though it's not as far-reaching, it's still a step in the right direction. A very big step. I'm completely proud of the fact that they took it. Honestly, I was kind of surprised that they even got it on a school level done, on a district level.
A public.
Right.
One. Yeah.
And then moved it to a statewide level. That was amazing.
I mean, I guess ideally you would want K through 12, but I mean, 9th and 10th grade are, I guess, the teenage years, I guess. You know, a lot of people like to refer to high school as the golden age or your golden years.
I don't understand that, but yeah.
Yeah, I don't either, but I know people do.
Yeah.
So, and they make a very large impact on people, so I understand why they would have chosen that, but I would have agreed more with the K-12.
Yeah. And Johnson, the student that kind of spearheaded this, even said of the current standard that he's putting forward, it only touches on mental health and it's not comprehensive. So it's just amazing what he's got done, but how much he and the other two students realize how far there is to go. It touches on it. It's not comprehensive. You know, the stressors still exist. That is the course load. And what we're trying to address is the stigma of talking about mental health and availability.
And that's really, again, what everything that we want to do with this podcast is just bring an understanding. You're not alone. People feel a lot of the same things, if not similar things. So keep that in mind, despite the struggle. I mean, it's easier said than done. All these things are, but it's not going to negate the effort you put into it. It really isn't. It's not going to negate the lessons you learn. If anything, it's going to reinforce them. So I really do appreciate you guys listening to us kind of go on and ramble a little bit, but I mean, it's fine though, because this is mental health. You can't help but ramble about it. It's everywhere. It's everything. It's now permeated just about every source of media. You said you're really into Criminal Minds.
We're going to have an episode on Criminal Minds.
That show's all about criminal minds and behavior and impotence. But no, you have a lot of fun stuff too, like Simpsons who do a lot of satire. The idea is also keep an open mind and just have a conversation with people. Like, I think if you reach out to anyone, you're going to realize you're not that far away from anyone's perspective or just like understanding, That being said though, actually, I think you have a very good closing for that.
Yes. John E. Douglas, retired special agent and unit chief.
Good Lord.
If you're listening for the Criminal Minds episode, we would love to have you on. He was one of the first criminal profilers, actually.
Again, a conversation for another episode.
Yeah.
But I think you have a more important message.
Oh, yeah. But of course. If you or someone you know needs help, call 1-800-273-8255 for the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. You can also text HOME to 741-741 for free 24-hour support from the crisis text line. Very good.
And those actually really are, they can do a lot of help. And I really hope you guys reach out to those if you need them. A lot of local resources are there. It does take a little bit of research, but it's there. Just reach out to someone. All right, guys?
Yeah, and I think in future episodes and talking about our own journeys, we will discuss some of the resources locally that are there.
Yeah. Send us a question, comment, concern, or whatever. Our Twitter is going to be at our soft machine, as well as our Instagram and subreddit. We're going to be found on iTunes and basically wherever you listen to podcasts. Podbean, of course, because it's our home station. But, explore. Like I've said before, education is going to be key, and just ask those questions and find out, what's going on. So, again, if you or anyone you know, reach out to the number. If you or anyone you know has any questions, comments, or concerns, let us know. And hopefully we can address those as we move forward. All right, guys. I really appreciate you guys listening to us. My name is Andrew.
My name's Sebastian.
It's good to stay a little crazy.